information from our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen. He has said, you might have heard this a few minutes ago, some local reports have suggested that the explosion was an accident at a fireworks storage warehouse. But Jeremy goes on to say, but with tensions high on the southern border of the country with Israel, many other scenarios are being discussed on social media. So clearly there is one theory out there that this might have been an industrial accident in what several of our guests have described as an industrial area of Beirut, a warehouse in a port. But clearly Jeremy Bowen, our Middle East editor, has put this into the wider context of Lebanon, and we know from speaking to others that every time there is an explosion in Lebanon, in Beirut, people's minds go back to all the previous rounds of explosions they have heard. Someone who knows the country very well is Sebastian Usher, the BBC's Middle East analyst. He's on the line with me now. Sebastian, your thoughts?
Yes, well, I mean, it's something where you immediately think of what the cause is. I mean, you look at Beirut, you look at Lebanon, you think the key thing is the cause. When you look at the pictures, when you hear the testimony, when you see the damage, when you hear from people who are kilometers away and their windows have been destroyed, and you know, offices have even inside are completely turned over, and it looks like a war zone, then you just have to think that in itself, whatever the cause of this was, this is just a huge major incident that has hit Beirut. And as you were saying in that introduction, you know, obviously it's a city that has experienced this so often in the past. And I mean, you talk about experience. I mean, when a blast like this happens in Beirut, obviously it reminds you of many, but there's one obviously in particular, and perhaps other people have mentioned this already, but you're thinking of this week, is the huge explosion which actually happened in the heart of Beirut, in the centre. This one happened away from that, perhaps fortuitously, you know, but that was the assassination of Rafik Hariri back in 2005. Now, this week on Friday sees the verdict being given in the trial of those who've been accused of involvement in his murder, all of them linked to Hezbollah. So there's been more tensions have been growing over that. Obviously, this will remind people of that, and people will even think, well, you know, is it related to it? I mean, everything will be going through people's minds. What could be the cause? Who could gain from this? Who would want to do this? But, you know, my first reaction is that something of this level at this moment in Beirut is raising the stakes so immensely that you can't think of an actor at the moment who would be willing or want to take that kind of a risk. Now, as you were saying, the reports at the moment, the preliminary reports from official sources, the health minister being one, is that it could have been in a fireworks factory. Obviously, the issue with that is when you look at the pictures, obviously that's what people are doing, you know, everywhere in Beirut, obviously particularly, an explosion of this nature, and almost unparalleled. It's an odd kind of explosion. There's a shock wave which happens. Who knows what fireworks do, but you kind of think, could it only have been fireworks would have caused such an explosion? And this is what's now going to be feeding through, and you can see it going through all the networks between people in Lebanon and outside, trying to work this one out, trying to see who might be behind it. And of course that will add to the tensions that Lebanon, you know, is always, essentially, in Beirut is always has that sense that it's on the cusp of something bad happening. That's been intensified recently with the economic collapse. Sectarian tensions have begun to grow again. So, you know, it can only add to that beyond what the human cost emerges in this. I mean, I'm seeing reports from friends, people I know, they're saying that hospitals are being overwhelmed at the moment by the numbers of people walking in with wounds.
Sebastian, bring us up to date, remind us of that delicate political balance that exists in Lebanon between the various sects.
Well, yes. I mean, it's a system which has been in place since the end of the long-running war, which was finally it was kind of ended, but never quite. It was never really resolved back in 1990 after 16 years, and that lays down a system where each of the powerful sects has one of the major positions of state. So the president is a Christian, the prime minister is a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker is a Shia. Now, we've seen in recent months this wave of anti-government protest has been against the whole system. It's wanted it ended. Now, those protests were motivated both with anger at the political system and its problems and its inability to bring Lebanon out of the state that it's been all these years, the corruption, the sense that the people always come last. And then that has been hugely exacerbated by the economic collapse that there's been, which has really raced ahead in the past 2 or 3 months. The currency now, which used to be pegged at about 1,500 to the dollar, is now running on the black market to at 8,000 or 9,000. So people are having their savings almost completely wiped out. People weren't able to get any of their dollars out of banks, and this is a country which relies on imports, on dollars. So you're seeing that desperation happening. There are warnings that there could be real hunger on the streets within the next few months if the situation isn't rectified in some way. There's a government in place which no one really trusts. There are deals that they're trying to do with the IMF to bring money in. That hasn't worked out as yet. The situation has slightly stabilized as far as the currency is concerned, but on the streets that's had no effect. So people who never had much trust in their politicians, in the elite, have completely rejected them now, but there's nothing to take their place as yet. So you have a country which is almost leaderless, which is an economic freefall, whose sects have never really been reconciled properly. There's been a paper-thin way of trying to give everybody answering their interests so that they keep relatively quiet. That money, those personal connections and favours are no longer working. So you have, you know, a very inflammable situation, and here you have a huge explosion. Now hopefully, and this is pure speculation, it will turn out that there wasn't an actor behind this, that this was an accident. That means that people in Beirut have to deal with the aftermath, which is going to be terrible enough, but may not have to deal with the consequences of if this was actually a plan that somebody has made in order to take the country further down the abyss that it's been staring at. And that's the hope that people in Beirut and in Lebanon will be clinging to right now.
Sebastian Usher, the BBC's Middle East analyst, journalist.